How do you do that to assure yourself that God exists then?
So testimonial evidence.
Okay, great question there, right? So he's gone through this whole thing about the doctor and why we think the doctors are reliable, and we accept what they tell us as some sort of authority and evidence towards, how we can get well and so forth. And she now asks, okay, so now how do you use that to now remember the question here, right? She's asking for similar sort of things that you would accept from a doctor, or why you would accept a doctor. How would you now use that sort of thing to show that God exists, right? Now let's see what he says.
Is used when we get this information from an individual who claims to be a prophet of God or messenger of God, and we have no reason to doubt about this claim. And at the same time, that individual.
How do you have no reason to doubt?
I'll explain. That individual at the same time brings evidence for support of his claim.
Okay, good. All right, so he wants to claim here that Muhammad, for example, is like a doctor. And DRastic, you can speak on this if you like a little bit as well. I think most non-believers are not going to accept this, and it doesn't matter, because whatever evidence he's going to bring here is going to be other eyewitness testimony, either of Muhammad himself or people that supported him, right? And none of that's going to be sufficient 1400 years ago.
Well, I think the first thing he goes into, I could be wrong, but he certainly says it at some point in the video. He goes on about this whole Muhammad was known as the truth teller. It's that kind of apologetic, and I think we can knock that one down. But I think that's coming right next. So maybe just spin on for a second.
But I think what I want to highlight here, and I don't know if there's anything you want to say now. If not, that's fine. Is that he wants to paint Muhammad like a doctor, that we have all this background information, we've been through all this checks, and we can trust it. And as I think you and I just discussed earlier, there's a whole system around the doctor, the medical profession, and it's things that you can likely test, and you can get papers on it. And if you really wanted to, you could set up or do some sort of experiment if you knew what you were doing, etc. So you can attempt to emulate what's being told to you here. You can't do any of that with the Quran. So basically, you've got to take it on faith and hope that what was recorded actually was said and took place. Right? Yeah. Now, Muslims want to say at this point, yes, look, we've got the science of recording this. They love to throw in the word science because they want to use some credibility there. But hey, the Quran has been preserved, or the hadiths, some of the sayings of the Prophet have been preserved. The problem is none of them were there 1400 years ago when the original sayings happened. And it doesn't matter, even if I granted that it was perfectly preserved from the first time somebody wrote something down, which is a huge grant, by the way, but suppose I bent over backwards to give them that. What they cannot verify is that what that person said at the very beginning, the source, actually happened as they said. That part they can never verify unless we went back in a time machine and we were there, all of us, watching it to verify, eyewitness, taking video cameras or whatever the case is. So they're still stuck at that point. But we can do the difference with the medical profession. We could, in fact, do it. Somebody says X, we could, in principle, and sometimes happens in practice, to go and verify that ourselves.
Yeah, and also the secondary problem, which you've already brought up, is the nature of the claims that are being made, because there are the first one being that he is a prophet of God. Now, that is very different to anything that any doctor is ever going to tell you. So already there is a huge disconnect between this comparison.
So, for example, if we find someone in all of his life never lied, always spoke the truth, whether he's young or at the early stage, in everyday interactions, we've never seen an individual like that person speaking untrue, always spoke the truth, always was reliable, truthful, trustworthy, and reliable. And now he says to you, I am telling you, God has made me a prophet to tell you, worship God alone.
Okay, right, let's again be charitable. Suppose he wasn't lying, because there's a difference between always speaking the truth and not telling lies, right? You can in fact not lie, but be mistaken about a great many things, because a lie means that you intentionally saying something you know is not true. You may think that it's true, but in fact it's false. Now, you wouldn't be a liar for saying that. You would simply be making false statements unbeknownst to you. So even if we granted that he never lied, that doesn't mean that he told the truth. But notice what he said. He said that he always told the truth. No. You can't establish that he didn't tell the truth. Even again, if we bent over backwards with this claim that Muhammad never lied or always spoke the truth, you can't tell that because you weren't there to verify everything he said in fact match reality. So if we were very charitable, all we could say is, let's go with your example that he never lied. Now, in fact, we don't know that because we don't know every single thing that he said, and we don't know whether in fact he was caught out or not. But let's suppose we grant that. So what? There's other people out there that are not liars, but they can be mistaken. So you've got to be very careful between the two. Not lying and always telling the truth are not the same things. And he conflated those two in the statement he made there.
Yeah, and also the even from the Islamic sources, there were plenty of people who did say that Muhammad was a liar. So it doesn't even fit with the standard narrative. Now, he will say, okay, these were the enemies of Muhammad, the enemies of Islam, etc. But how do you know? How can you be absolutely sure that, or have any kind of high degree of confidence that those other people had it wrong about Muhammad? I just think you're talking about sources of information that go back 1,000 years or more. You're not sure how reliable they are. And also, I mean, the first 40 years of Muhammad's life, it's basically an empty book. So how can you say that in those early years he wasn't a huge liar? So, I mean, there's so many problems with this, I think.
Why should we immediately disbelieve in him by rejecting his statement to be untrue? Because we know him already. He never speaks the lie at all. Because his life has been consistently a truthful individual. So to say he lied...
See, he did it again. The fact that he doesn't lie doesn't mean that he's a truthful individual. By truthful, we mean that whatever his statement is matches reality. As I said, you could make statements that are not lies, but don't match reality. So you're making false statements unbeknownst to you. And that's, so you just got to be so careful because they're quite slippery by equating those two. But even if that were the case, even if he told the truth about all the natural things in the world, that wouldn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't. I wouldn't necessarily take it that he's therefore being truthful about supernatural claims. Again, as you pointed out, it's a different category. He could be entirely truthful about the natural and be making up or be mistaken about the supernatural.
Well, yeah, and that's the key point. Saying that someone always tells the truth is not the same as saying someone is always right. And that is what he's trying to conflate. And as you say, yeah, the supernatural claims, doesn't matter how truthful they are, you're going to need something more than that. If you've got any kind of critical thinking skills operating in your head, you are going to want to definitely have more for such a grandiose claim as I am the prophet of God.
Lied is now opening an avenue to say, why? Why would he do that? We start now, you have to really be critical and say, what could be the reason for his lying? If you cannot find any reason for his lying, then you have to ask, why am I disregarding it? And if he brings at the same time evidence...
I mean, again, even if you can't come up with any rational reason for why he might be lying, let's say he doesn't have any particular motivation, that still doesn't mean that what he's saying is accurate. It's two different things.
Yeah, and I think non-believers, if you're ever going to speak to Muslims, do not fall into the trap of taking any other position other than Muhammad was mistaken. Because if you claim that he was lying or he was hallucinating, they're going to ask you for the evidence. And unless you have got evidence for that, you're not going to be able to back up the claim. The only claim that we need to make or to accept or to be skeptical of is that he in fact was telling the truth in the sense that he could be mistaken, not that he was lying. That's all you need. Otherwise, you're taking that extra step, and then you're going to have to justify it. And so, because Hamza, Redbeard Hamza and other Muslims trying to give you these various options, the one they never give you is that he's mistaken, right? And that's the only one we need to do, is to say he's mistaken.
Yeah.
Then these testimony and the evidence at the same time back up with each other of what is claiming to be true. Because you have to either say, okay, he's a liar and has all these motives, or he's actually what he claims to be.
See, false dichotomy. That's not true. He's not a liar or that he claims to be. He's mistaken. That's all we need, right? That's all we need. So don't ever, that he made a false dichotomy. Some of the other ones offer you three choices, but they leave out the one that he's mistaken. So just you never have to accept these false dichotomies or false trichotomies.
There's another point as well, which the audience might have missed because of where we were pausing it. But he said that Muhammad also, you combine it with the evidence that he brought for his claims. Well, I'm not sure what evidence Muhammad brought for his claims other than I was visited by Jibril. but nothing that I know of that will be credible evidence for his claim. Now, it'd be interesting to see if Mansur does actually go into this, but I think it's one of these passing remarks which he never gives any more detail on. But we'd have to.
Yeah, that's very typical in Speaker's Corner. They claim there's evidence, they never demonstrate there's evidence. And they think that if they use the word evidence a lot, somehow that is in fact evidence. The evidence is using the word evidence or something like that.
Yeah.
But again, all you need to do is ask, where is this evidence, right? He might say something like, well, he said the moon would be split, and it was. Show us the evidence that anybody actually believed it at that time, or that we should believe it today, or whatever other quote unquote evidence he's going to bring. But you're right. All they use oftentimes is the word. They don't go into specifics of that, because then you can challenge that, of course.
Mm.
Or
yes,
he could actually believe that he was a prophet.
he could believe, good, he could sincerely believe that he was a prophet, right?
Yeah.
Meaning he was deluded in thinking that he was a prophet. So no, very good. So we can, so this is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's talk about him. We can apply, we can talk.
I would just say mistaken. Don't accept deluded, because there's extra connotations with deluded. Sometimes deluded can be taken as you are saying something in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, and that can often be sort of tweaked a little bit to say that he's lying. So I wouldn't accept the word deluded. I'm going to reframe it and said, no, he's mistaken. He's just saying something that he doesn't know is false. He thinks it's true, but in fact it's false, like most humans have done at one point or another in their life. That's all I have to say. But I won't accept the word deluded, because it has these extra connotations to it that can make it. Now you might get in a corner. Oh, you said deluded. And now you go into a definition of deluded. Either you go into the weeds, or you now have to present more evidence on your side of the fence to back up the word deluded. Don't accept that, because what they're looking for is to shift it over to you. And
and there's also
words, the more you have to hold the burden.
There's also potentially the implication of, say, mental illness to go along with that, and I don't think you need to open that door for them. As you say, I think just saying mistaken, I think, is good enough.
Yeah.
Talk about, is it possible to say that he was deluded in terms of what he claimed and what he preached and what he brought as the Quran?
Yeah.
If we find someone's deluded, would he then claim to know about science and metaphysics and astronomy and biology and botany and economics and anthropology? And
Yeah, of course. Deluded people can make all kinds of claims. That's part of what a deluded person is. But even a mistaken person can make claims about all fields of expertise of which they have none. So yes, that's characteristic with a deluded or mistaken person.
Well, again, I think a reasonable example of this would be somebody like Isaac Newton. I mean, undoubtedly a scientific genius, revolutionized science as we know it. And yet he also believed in angels, literally dancing around the place. So you can be correct in some temporal, natural pursuit, and you can be a genius in it, and you can still have other beliefs which you have no good reason to believe. So yeah, he's acting as if these two things can't go alongside each other, but they do all the time.
X, Y, and Z. Because a deluded person is just simply deluded. He doesn't have the understanding of critical thinking, of to have the sanity to say that, yes, I'm actually in my sane sense.
As a person.
Okay, well, that's just waffle. So we just ignore. That was just waffle. It hardly made any sense.
As a person, though, you can make yourself believe all those things. And still think that you're rational.
Yeah, you can think so. You can think so. Then you have to ask yourself, how does he then talk about interoceanic waves? He's never been to sea. His people have witnessed it.
Okay, so now he's going to the so-called evidence, and I invite you, if you're a listener, to go look this up. There is a verse, and the reason I know this off the top of my head is because there was a Muslim on Clubhouse when I was speaking to try to present this as well. There's a verse about waves upon waves, and they interpret this to mean there's waves on the top of the sea and there's waves underneath, aka currents, the things that most of us understand to be currents. And I won't go into a long story. Go look it up yourself and then see whether somehow this is miraculous. Actually, it's talking about like when it's sort of the end times come and this is what's going to happen, and you're out at sea. It's like a metaphor. You're out at sea, it's dark, you've got all these waves upon waves, the rain, the darkness. You're going to be all alone in this scary place, if you're not with God, type of thing. That's the kind of metaphor that he's referring to in a few verses, and that's got nothing to do with the reality of certain things because he wants to say, oh, well, Muhammad couldn't have known there were currents, waves upon waves. This could only come from God, right? That's the sort of thing he's trying to claim here.
I also think, just if you are going to take that literally, anyone who has dived down to a certain depth will know that there are different currents at different levels of the water. This, again, is not an impressive piece of knowledge. Anybody who has been a swimmer and a diver would know this.
Never been to sea. But he's talking about the existence of interoceanic waves and darkness within this deep sea. A deluded person.
No, he's not. That's your interpretation's darkness. But that's fine as well. Even if we granted that, again, a rational person, if you've dived down, you find that it gets darker as you go down. So you can induce, you can think about it and say, well, okay, if I kept going down, it would get darker. There's nothing, that's just a rational, inference that you can draw if you've ever been swimming. But it doesn't necessarily mean down there. It can also mean on top of the ocean as well, like it's a dark night.
Well, also, just quickly on this, just to emphasize this point, because this came up in another video that I looked at recently, what's called the sunlight zone in the ocean is only about 200 meters down, which is not actually that much. 200 meters, and then you are in basically perpetual darkness. And you're going to get gradients of that, even going down probably 10, 20, 30 meters, which is easily achievable by a human being. So this is not impressive knowledge at all.
Is not someone who goes and studies. That's not delusion, because you'll not be deluded anymore. You will be enlightened with knowledge. You will not be called deluded. But he's coming up with information that goes against any concept of being deluded. He's talking about something like the universe is such that the earth and everything beyond this earth was actually joined together as one piece, and then it parted it, and it's expanding, and then it will contract back.
Oh, the expanding it. I mean, it has to come up every time, doesn't it, with these scientific miracles? I think it's been well established now that the idea of an expanding universe is a retranslation once that scientific knowledge was gained. It actually said the universe is expansive, I think was the original translation. And you won't find any classical scholar who translates the Quran in that way. Every kind of translation that says the universe is expanding in the Quran has come since Hubble, since 1929, whenever it was that he made the discovery. So this is a very tired apologetic, and it's been debunked 1,000 times.
Yeah, that's the one part of it, right? Which I agree. It's only these modern translations that have expanding or expanders or whatever the case is. But the other thing he's talking about is a verse where it basically says that the heavens and the earth were split asunder. But even that's mistaken, because there was no earth to split asunder. And if we track that back, because what they want to say, it's kind of analogous to the Big Bang, but in fact it's not. Because the heavens, if we take the heavens, which they didn't know about, by the way, and it's not referred to in the Quran, as the universe, the rest of the universe, and then the earth, the planet that we see today, well, of course, the earth only came about 9 billion years after the expansion of the universe.
That's right.
So even if we go with that, it's not accurate with our best scientific understandings anyway, because the earth only formed way, way later. It wasn't split asunder from the heavens. So that, again, on a straightforward reading, is false. But again, they will massage this, retranslate this, and come up with their own interpretations. All we have to do is reject it. And I think we're more than justified in rejecting their weird gymnastic type interpretations of these verses. But some Muslims have realized this, and they don't make these claims. But people like Mansur and others, when they speak to people like this that they think might not know very much, they'll still bring this up. But again, somebody like me or anybody else, they wouldn't try and bring this up if they know who I am, and because I'll just make mincemeat of this, as we are doing now. And so they just wouldn't bring this up. And they look silly to other Muslims as well, who have recognized that they shouldn't be doing this anymore. So this is kind of an outdated, tired trope that they play on unsuspecting people that may not know much about the Quran.
Yeah.
Now, a deluded person to make things like that when the dominant understanding at this time was the universe is static. It doesn't expand. It doesn't contract. Why is he making these things? Where is he getting this from? Not from his contemporaries' culture and science and technology of his time, because they don't even know that.
Look, he's not getting it from the Quran either, because the Quran doesn't say that. And by the way, there isn't many scientific models that talk about the contracting part of the universe. Most of the models that I've heard about talk about the universe continuing to expand on, not contracting back. There are bounce models, but those are kind of far more rare as far as I understand anyway. So he's certainly not getting it from the Quran or from God. And if he was, then certainly God hasn't communicated in the Quran in any intelligible way. So this is just a massive extrapolation from things that it doesn't straightforwardly or even remotely allude to in the Quran.
Yeah.
Myself, as we have now learned about the redshift, the cosmic background radiation, Hubble telescope, we are now observing and confirming the universe, the stars are receding from each other. They're actually expanding. So at one point, it
yes,
wasn't
which is
as it's now.
I mean, yes, which is exactly why you find the retranslations, because you are trying to make the Quran fit the current science. And if the current science changes, then you'll go back to what you previously had. I mean, it's so blatant what you're doing, and yet you're trying to pass this off as some kind of miracle. It's not. It's the miracle of retranslation.
So they go extrapolate back to a point where there was absolute singularity, such a minute singularity of condensed space and whatever. That is what Quran is describing. At one point it was like one, and there was a separation.
Notice how he now retranslates this. It was one and there was separation. No, that's not what the Quran says. It says that the earth and the heavens were split asunder. Go read it. Go and type it up now while we think. It didn't say it was one and it came apart. You see how they surreptitiously changed the interpretation right in front of it. But if you're not paying attention, you're not used to this, and you don't know what the Quran actually says, you're likely to hum along because you're not going to necessarily know the sleight of hand that's being pulled. But luckily, we're here to help you out, to slow it down and to show you when they do, in fact, change these words. And I think here be a little bit dishonest, because that's not what the Quran is saying. He's now saying what he claims the Quran is saying, but in fact, it's a massive inference. It's a massive interpretation that he's making there that he isn't justified in doing.
Yeah.
And sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, you get this in other examples, like I think there's some Quranic verse talking about a knocking sound, and I've seen Muslims go on this long kind of mental gymnastics to say that this is somehow talking about pulsars, because it has like this. The regular beat of a pulsar is somehow like a knocking sound. It's so ridiculous, the stretches that they make to try and make it fit.
Yeah, and of course the other thing is when you hear this is probably a sign for you. When you hear this, these are not particularly sophisticated Muslims that are making this, because there are in fact sophisticated, at least a little bit more sophisticated Muslims that recognize this is just embarrassing to say, if you want to be taken seriously by anybody that's kind of has some standing in any intellectual field. So they don't make the claim. But people like this will do it to lay people on the street because they don't care how they look to, sort of people who are more discerning, because a lot of the people that are watching this are not discerning at all. Right. So they'll just nod along. They wouldn't know. I mean, he could say the sky is purple with pink polka dots or whatever, and somehow they just nod along as well. Right. And so he's got a very easy audience. It's like an audience of hypnotized Muslims primarily, and they just nod along. But unfortunately, more and more of us and other people out there are paying attention to this, and we'll stop it and we'll go through it like we are now, just to show that in fact this isn't the case. And all we have to do is slow it down, go through it, and show you what's going on here. Once you unpack it, then you can see what's actually happening here, because it all happens very quickly, especially if you're in Speaker's Corner.
And Rob, I'll make one quick point on this as well. I mean, the recent outbursts from Ali Dawah about the scientific miracles being debunked. This is a great example of the fact that even though there's acknowledgement that this entire line of argument is absolute nonsense, you can see that they still continue to use it upon people who they prey on in the park, who they will know are not used to this line of apologetics. And so even though they know in their heart that this is just complete bunk, they will still use it as a tactic to try and persuade people who don't know it. So it's a double level of dishonesty. Number one, because what they're saying isn't actually true. But number two, they know it isn't.
The inflation theory is a big bang in inflation. But it doesn't stop there. It says it will be rolled back like a scroller's roll. There are more scientists talking about now the fate of our universe. Because gravity is such strong, what's going to happen to the universe? Is it going to keep on expanding, or is it going to come back? Right? Science is now dealing with this question. A deluded individual coming up with something so profound that today we cannot disregard that this is something that is untrue.
He hasn't come up with anything profound. Let's just make that clear and move on. He's claiming he hasn't done so. He's talked about a few things. This individual didn't say anything about what he's just said there. It's a big extrapolation, which he's not justified in making.
He said something which now we are saying, yeah, that makes sense. Now we go through with all the submarines or go in space and look at the interoceanic waves. You know about deep sea currents. You can't just simply observe them with a diver, because you have the oceanic waves, but deep down they're sea currents, sometimes in opposite directions. They're like waves within the oceans. The Quran is talking about these existence of these waves.
No, it's not. You're extrapolating that the Quran is doing so. Just go read the verse there. And people have, they tried this on me, DRastic, for about half an hour. They got very upset when I didn't accept their definition of wave. And I just went online. I found a document that went through this, and it talks about waves on top, currents underneath. No. I'm being dishonest, get this, because I don't accept their definition. What's their definition? A specific definition that's in line with the Quran, so they can try and make it make sense and make it claim that there's some miracle. A nice big circle, in case anybody was wondering.
I bet you really miss going down there and having those kinds of arguments.
Sometimes, I mean, I think the level that I do on Clubhouse is higher, at least sometimes. But yeah, I miss the odd going down there, and because I've learned a lot since going down there, specifically about how people, what they do and so forth. But now I'd have a Quran with me, in a digital one that I bring it up and I read it out loud there straight away. Hey, where did you get that? Let's see what it actually says. Because again, he's summarizing stuff here to make it sound like science or our observations meet the Quran, and in fact they don't. All you have to do is have the verses up and have a closer look at them, and then you can see that he's extrapolating, he's interpreting massively to get there. But when a non-believer does that and interprets far more rigorously, then they don't like it. So there's an inconsistency here between when somebody else is interpreting the verses for them and when they're doing it to somebody else. Very big difference between the two.
And it's worth noting at this point that this has turned into a bit of a gish gallop. It's claim after claim after claim with he's not even given her a chance to come back at him. So yeah,
that's typical again, right? When they see that the interlocutor is not somebody that's going to challenge them, it sort of almost gives them like tacit permission to start preaching and to start, shotgunning all these sort of things one after another, because it's very hard then afterwards for somebody to come and go, okay, that first claim you made, because they would have forgotten about it if you do enough of these in a row, right? And then it sounds like this guy knows what he's talking about and nobody's refuted it. And in fact, all that's happened is gish galloped, as you said, and she hasn't had time, and most people haven't that are there. You got to stop them one at a time. Okay, you said that. Let's go and look at the verse. Let's see if any reasonable person would take that view. Right, and you can go through it, or however you want to do it, but stop them one after another. Don't allow the gish gallop if you are there. But much harder when somebody's doing it. You've got to be a little bit more forthright, but that takes practice. When I would, in the beginning, I would let them go on because I hadn't heard these things before. So I was a bit like her when I first started. It sounded like bollocks to me the first time I ever heard it, but I let them gish gallop a while because I'd never heard it before. But once you have, you just stop them straight away on each point, even if you haven't heard it. Okay, I've heard that one claim. Let's talk about that one. No, I don't need a second one now. Let's have a look at that one first. Otherwise, you get this whole long story.
Doesn't even know that. He doesn't have a submarine, but he's talking about someone, the layers. Light passes through and there's darkness in layers until there's total darkness. Now we know that's the case. There's total darkness, and we are surprised that within this total darkness there are creatures, fish, whatever.
Yeah, now that would have been surprising had the Quran talked about the fish down there and described any of the fish at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. That might have been surprising. Guess what? The Quran talks about none of those things. It gives vague things that you can interpret in whichever way you fancy to make it sound as if the Quran is matching our best observations today. And hopefully, if you're a critical thinker, that's never going to be satisfactory.
They have their own light source. Yeah. So how does he know that this is the thing, in our natural phenomenon? How does he know the common origin of a matter and cosmos is like this? I'll give you 2 examples. So this is not as with many. I don't want to bore with examples, but to illustrate to you. Someone who's deluded can be easily excluded by looking at what he has brought. It's not a sign of delusion. A deluded individual cannot bring you something like this and be so coherently explaining things going against the status quo of the scientific community, and then says it's this. They're saying the earth is flat, the universe is static, and the Quran is saying no, it's not the case.
Yeah, show us in the Quran where it's saying it's not the case. That's all you have to do. Show us in the Quran where it's saying it's not the case. Wait and
also,
watch.
There's another point I just want to quickly raise here. Even if what he was saying is true, which it isn't, there would have been no reason for that to have been a good reason for somebody to follow him. If he was saying things that was against the scientific consensus or the known consensus of the natural world, why would that be a reason for people then to think, oh, you must be a prophet of God? Surely they would just think you're wrong about those things, so you're not a prophet of God.
Yeah,
So
it might not have appealed to them at that stage. That's right. And they might have rejected it. But today, wow, we would have gone, this is amazing, right? So yeah, it's one of, either you weren't going to appeal to the people at the time, or you're not going to appeal to the people after that time that actually did know. And of course, as you and I know, somebody like Eratosthenes kind of worked out the Earth's circumference within 10% of what we understand today in 280 BC, almost 1,000 years before Muhammad ever existed. And he extrapolated through his measurements in Alexandria and a place about 1,000 miles or whatever it was distance away that he got somebody to measure. He extrapolated from that, that the Earth was, that the surface of the Earth was curved, and therefore if you carried on with a curve, you get a particular circumference. So this was something that people long before this had actually tried to demonstrate in a scientific way. Hey, if this is the case, what would I expect to have happen? Let me try this out and see what happens.
Yeah,
that's how we do
and yet Eratosthenes did not claim that he had supernatural knowledge, and nobody else thought he did. It was just a careful, intelligent, and scientific procedure to determine something that turned out to be extremely accurate, which I think is far more impressive than anything you can find in the Quran.
Yeah, very smart idea.
What gives him the competence and confidence and knowledge base to make that information? So when we talk about testimonial evidence and we examine the life of the Prophet, if we consider him to be a prophet, he must have some motives for his. You make one motive which is sincerely deluded in thinking, and that's why he's saying our prophet. All the things that he's coming up with, it goes against a deluded individual. What could it be? Could it be that he wanted to have fame, authority, rulership, kingship? He wanted to be the leader. He wanted to have money and wealth. He wanted women. Guess what? All of that was offered to him. All of that was offered. He says, if you want to be the king, we'll make you the king. Because what happened was...
Yeah, I'm sorry. What is he referring to here? And he said, he was offered to become the king. Who offered that to Muhammad?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Basically what he's doing here is going, let's speculate about Muhammad's motivations. Why would he be doing this? Well, actually, if we strip this all away, he's simply doing it because it was the truth. What he wants to do is try and eliminate any possible biases or considerations that might have got him to do this. But I don't remember who it was that claimed this. I'm not. It's not in the Quran anyway, if I remember correctly.
Well, I don't know who would have been. I mean, what the Meccans, the Medinans? Did they say we want you to be king or something? I mean, it just sounds like something he's making up.
Honestly, I don't remember.
But I would also say, I mean, he's mentioned, he didn't do it for fame, he didn't do it for power, he didn't do it to be a leader. Well, all of it, or money, all of those things came to him. So you can hardly say that he was living like a pauper or that he didn't have great authority, because he ended up becoming the ruler of a new religion. So to claim that these were not factors in his life, that he was just walking around like a poverty-stricken monk and was just doing it on this purely quote unquote for spiritual reasons or whatever, well, that goes against the basic narrative of Muhammad's life. I mean, he was raiding caravans and stealing the wealth. He was raising armies. So how is he not a ruler? How is he not a warlord in that sense? How did he not have access to slaves and as many wives as he wanted? This is just, it's trying to reinvent him as if he's a sort of, or more like a Buddha-like figure. Just I'll just leave all my wealth behind and I'll walk out and just be taken care of by the people. If I preach them the truth, they'll give me a bit of food or something. That's not Muhammad's life. So this is complete bullshit.
Avoiding worshipping the idols, their whole economy was being shattered, because their economy, out of all of the things is based on people coming in to have pilgrimage, bringing in money and homage and so on. It's a thriving economy of the Meccan pagans. And he's saying, no, there are no 360 idols. There's only one God. So all of them are false, redundant. So,
What about jinns, for example?
jinns. What are jinns? Do you believe in jinns?
Okay. Do you remember here? I'm not sure we want to go down the route of jinns here. Up to you. If this is sort of going off this, remind me now.
I can't remember where this goes because it's been a while since I've watched the video, and I didn't rewatch this last segment. So, I mean, I don't mind playing it for a bit, but if it really goes off on a tangent, I'm happy to leave it.
All right, we'll have a short listen to this bit, but if they go sort of off tangent a lot here, we might bring it to a close. So let's listen for a moment.
Yeah, exactly. So if you don't believe in jinns, how can you then bring a jinn to be a cause for all of that? Because you yourself not sure. If you're sure about the jinn, I can tell you, even the jinns cannot do certain things. They have their own limitations. Jinns are not divine beings. They are agents with reason, will, or faculty of choice. Either they accept or reject and so on. They may have.
Yeah, Rob, I think it's just a tangent, to be honest. So if
Did you
you're
see the guy yawning in the background there, the bald guy. I noticed he was yawning a bit there as well.
I concur with that yawn, to be honest, because I think this is just he'll waffle on now for the last few minutes. So
yeah,
if you're happy to round it up there, I am too.
Yeah, let's do that then. So that brings us to the end of this review. I hope you found it useful, entertaining, educational. And I hope, again, what we've done is that as well. Slow this down, show you what's going on, show you the sleight of hand that's being presented here, certain tactics that are being presented, and also the claims for which they don't have justification. But they rely on people that don't know any better and are not really going to challenge them. But that's what we're here to do. So as always, to my, in this instance, my co-reviewer, DRastic, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, we may well do another one. You never know. Any final words from your side, DRastic?
Yeah, I enjoyed doing it, and love to do some more in the future. It was good fun.